Welcome back to the morning show. It is Wednesday, 6:50. That means one thing. Mr. Matt Sellon, our wise guy, is back, and we're talking about motion today.
Well, it's actually about balancing, because okay. I don't know.
Well, I'm out of balance, as you already know, so maybe I'll get some good tips.
Yeah, well, you know, I thought about this because it's sort of what I'm teaching in my class right now, and it has to do with something called center of gravity, and it also has to do with something called moment of inertia, and we'll talk about how you balance things like this. You know, if you want to balance stuff on your nose, which is kind of a magic trick for Andy Dallas. Well, we'll do that when we come back. But first, to introduce all this stuff, it's really important to understand the idea of center of gravity. Okay. Because center of gravity is the location on an object, which is sort of the average location of all the stuff. So for something like a meter stick, it says right in the middle. And you can find it by if you just hold a meter stick like this and you slide your fingers together, they're always going to meet at the center of gravity. Oh, cool. Okay, it's kind of interesting. And you can see if you put something heavy on one side, the center of gravity is no longer going to be in the middle of the stick. It's going to be sort of over toward the heavy thing, right? So if you think of the center of gravity as the place where you would stick your finger and have it balance, that's where it is. And the reason that's important is because that's the spot that you can kind of think of as all the gravity being concentrated at and pulling down. And so if you try to suspend the object from a different place, the object is going to turn or rotate so that the center of gravity hangs directly beneath the suspension point. It's like if you hang something from a string, it's going to hang right underneath where you hold on to it. So if you hold on to a solid object, the center of gravity is going to want to go and sit right underneath. Okay, and that's a stable place right there. You can also have something be sort of unstable but still motionless if you get the center of gravity right above the pivot point. Okay, but this is hard because any little motion away from directly above, and the thing tries to flop down and be underneath. Okay, so why am I talking about all this? I don't know.
That was my next question, Matt. Why are you talking about all this?
Well, because you can make all kinds of nifty little effects using this. Okay, so here's one of these little birds that you can probably get at Andy Dallas's store, and it's a little Tweety bird, and it actually even can make a noise if I turn it on, but I can't seem to do that. But the magical thing is that it seems to balance on his nose. Sure. Okay? And so the way that this thing works, the reason this bird doesn't fall off is that the center of gravity of the bird is actually directly underneath his nose. And the way that you concoct this to make this happen is that you see how his wings are kind of a little lower than his head on either side? They're little lead weights inside the tips of his wings. And what that does is when you figure out the center of gravity of this whole thing, because the tips of his wings are kind of low, it makes the center of gravity be just underneath the tip of his nose, and so this is a stable equilibrium. He doesn't fall off. He doesn't just fall like that. Right. He stands like this, and you can poke him and twist him, and he can tweeter and stuff like that. Nice. You can do stuff at home to illustrate this. Okay, we have about a minute. Okay, so here all I did was I took a couple of forks, and I stuck a match into them, and you can just sort of balance these things on a glass like this. And then if you'd use a toothpick, you can actually light the toothpick on fire, and it'll burn all the way up to the lip of the glass, and then it'll go out because the glass absorbs the heat. And you can see these things on YouTube. People just think it's amazing that the thing stops burning. But I'm telling you, it's just because of the... it's a nice little parlor trick. Yeah, it's kind of a parlor trick, and so you can make this balanced. And over here, I've got something that will kind of sort of amaze you, because you think that, well, maybe not. But anyways, this is a heavy old hammer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hang it underneath this thing, twist this up a couple of times, and this is just a piece of wood that's been hinged, okay? But when I release this thing, okay, what happens is, here's the pivot point. It really hangs from here. So the center of gravity of this whole thing, this red piece of wood and the hammer, has to be right here, right underneath this pivot point. Okay, so if I try to move it away from that, it goes back underneath. But it's kind of interesting because you expect, you've attached a big hammer out here, you think maybe it's just going to go like that or slam up against, but it just doesn't. Very cool. All right, Matt. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for getting me centered during this segment. I appreciate it. Yeah, and when we come back, we'll balance stuff on your nose. How about that? Awesome. That's coming up in 30 minutes. But first, let's check in with Jennifer Ketchmark for a check of your storm tracker weather. Jen.
All right, it has been a